Alright, so my name is Evan Strong, and I make videos like this geared around the lacing of our shoes, the tying of our shoes, and the things within all of our clothing that we wear that are different left to right and front to back, pulling our bodies out of their natural functioning center line and not allowing us to just work as we would as human beings before we place modern day clothing on our bodies. So, a few prerequisites that I always say are lace your shoes with my technique. And the reason you need to use my technique, not that it's necessarily mine, but the way that I have found to lace shoes is because it allows your foot to fit within your shoe as a glove would on your hand. And just allow all the functionality to be in there while still having your shoe on. That includes tying your shoes from the outside over to the inside evenly on both sides to allow for internal rotation, and removing the tags stemming from the tongue of your shoes all the way up the entirety of your clothing. So those are my prerequisites. Very like, do this at least. And then within a lot of the content that I've already placed, there's things that I show within the clothing you already have, modifications that you can do. But I'm going to talk about naturally healthy shoulders, because we should naturally have shoulders that function. Unless we have had an injury to them, or if we have some kind of deformity, which is fine, or there's something that's actually going on, we should just have function within the shoulders that we have to our own body's capability. So I go over how clothing affects the body, and I go over it into depth. I talk about how we should never have to stretch unless something happens. I talk about how we should not be exercising just for the sake of exercising, because the body works out of a position. It has a natural position which is emphasized on an internal rotation, on a posterior tuck of the pelvis, and having everything in a neutral foundation to start from. And this is just a position we would naturally be in as humans. So I've talked about before shirts, and I say that, well, first, before I talk about shirts, I am going to be designing clothing, and when I talk about my clothing that will be coming, I mention, if you purchase it, do not purchase my clothing ever to fit you oversized. The only reason I'm designing clothing is to have it fit where it needs to allow the body to function. It should fit, there's a reason I'm wearing this shirt for this video, but it should fit with the shoulder seams right at the edges of your shoulders, and with the shoulder seams on top behind your shoulders. And that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about in this video. So in 2024, today's the 9th of September, 2024, there's so much modern clothing that's just got weird seams in it that just alter our body, and we need to operate out of a center line within our own body's situation, because if not, right, I talk about the sternum and the nose and the spine, which is directly behind the sternum, being the center of our bodies. And I also, like I say, I do not stretch, but I have mobility and motion in my body that would just naturally be there because I allow it to through the clothing that I wear. So if we have a center line and we're going straight, things should be even from that center line left and from that center line right. And in modern clothing, it's so common to have this little collar seam. I've gone over this collar seam since I started making videos. I've talked about, in my very first video on the human body, I talked about this collar seam because it's different. It's not on one side, but it's most definitely on this side. So if you can see, when I'm standing, this right shoulder seam on top is wanting to come forward, because this seam, it's just stitched together, so it'll just react differently, and it'll cause you to stand like this. So this right one is pretty close to where it should be. Behind my shoulder, there's that little bone right on top. That should always be in front of the seam. The seam should always be behind that little bone on the top of your shoulder, because then you can just have motion within your shoulder, right? But if this seam comes in front of that bone, that's my the little bone on my shoulder. The seam on this side is now in front of it. I can't lift because there's just a seam in the way. It needs to be just out of the way so that I can lift, or else I can't. What it will do, if this little seam is in front of your bones on the top of your shoulders, it will put you into external rotation. You will not be able to lift. You will get just an insane amount of binding up within your rib cage, within the muscles up like into your armpit that go into your rotator cuff. Your pecs will shorten chronically until fixed, and you will be in this constant chronic state of external rotation, and you won't have active muscles. I talk about how the muscles should be activated. It's not about being active sports-wise. It's about having the muscles be in a constant state of turned on, activated, just so they're ready to go. You cannot have arches that are naturally in your feet to support your entire body if your shoulders are in external rotation, because your body's all connected. And so your feet can't naturally work if your shoulders are not, because then your pelvis will have to adjust. If my shoulders are allowed to sit where they should, shoulder seams behind my shoulders so that they can be in a natural internal rotation position, which is a wrapping of the scapula up and around the rib cage to allow it to expand in 360 degrees and breathe. If my shoulder seams do sit behind my shoulders where they should, now my pelvis can tuck posterior into a neutral position where it should be. But if my shoulder seams fall forward, my pelvis goes anterior, right? The rear comes up. And I've mentioned things within the pants that will cause that also. But if every item of clothing is the way that I've described how it universally needs to be, because we are all universally designed in the image of our living God, who is Jesus Christ. We have our very, 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 very slight differences within us as individuals, but the skeletal system and the function of the mechanics of the human body are universal across humans, all of us. So, I mean, again, you can be maybe missing a limb or have a deformity, but the general makeup of the human body is universal. So, within those things, right, in your own situation. So, these shoulder seams will deactivate your core if they come in front, and you'll be like this. I always show the thumbs to follow them into internal rotation and into external rotation. If the shoulder seams are here, you'll be in external rotation. And we need to be naturally, because we would naturally be in internal rotation, right? Open, active, arches of the feet, pelvis tucked posteriorly, core activated, using the posterior chain, hamstring and glutes of the body for just about all function. There's little to no strength within the front of your body. Those muscles aren't your main strength muscles. That's just not how the body is actually designed to work. And that's why it's hard to work in those positions. So, when having this collar seam here, not only is this side that it's on almost always now going to be in chronic external rotation because it's sitting just where it should not be, in front of the shoulder. That's also causing a twist. But this one, the side where the seam is, will generally sit in front of that shoulder, but that will cause the right shoulder or the opposite side to be affected as well. So again, if you have a center line, anything that happens on this side will affect this side, and vice versa, because it's your entire body has to work as a whole. Because anywhere your foot goes, the rest of your body goes. You're all connected within your own body. So I've shown the little modification that I've actually done to this one to do. You see that little tiny cut? You follow the seam down, and right where the seam meets this, you make that little, it's probably a millimeter cut right there. And I've shown to do that because that allows it to sit a lot better. It allows it to sit flat. Otherwise, it'll try to come up, because where the thickness of that seam is, that little snip that I make down there allows it to kind of lay into, like that seam will open up just slightly and allow this. Let me explain it well for this. That's what this video is about. I've talked about it before. So that little slit will be allowed to open up a little bit, as you see, and then the thickness of this seam will be able to kind of press between that slit to allow it to lay flatter on the neck. And you can tell by that's what it's doing. And you can see it. If I did not make that slit, it would be sitting more like this, off of my shoulder. And did you see how my shoulder came up? Sort of did it to demonstrate, but also that's what will happen. If you don't make my little slit modification, this will sit here, and now your left trap will be trying to find that material of the shirt. I've been over this, but I haven't gone into depth of what it will do to the shoulders. So this left trap, which is this upper trap muscle that travels from around in here up all the way along your spine up into basically the base of your skull right there. And that muscle that allows your shoulders to shrug, picture like shoulder shrugs as far as the gym exercise people do, or just, lifting your shoulders, that trap plays a huge part in that position. And also that allows, one of the things that allows internal rotation, right? So if this left side trap is constantly doing this, this right shoulder will drop forward, really external. So you're gonna be standing, but you're gonna be like this. And as I show, when most people unevenly tie their shoelaces, as I did until I found out through, I've told my story about how I got to where I am now, and messing with shoelaces, and we need to tie them evenly over toward the inside, because that unevenness at the base gets played into with this same seam. So same patterning gets played into by this. So this, you at least need to make the modification that I've shown here, because then it will allow it to sit flat. Because if that's sitting up, plus this is forward, now you're going to be like very, very uneven, and your sleep will be affected, your every aspect of all of everything in your life will be affected by that. So I will never put this in my clothing that I'm designing. I will never have a collar seam like this. Never. It doesn't allow you to have even shoulders, and you can never have even shoulders. I could never have even shoulders with having this the way that it comes from the factory. Doing that little tiny slit, literally a millimeter, will allow it to be decent. It will. I purchased this shirt not only for this video, knowing that it had this seam, and I made the modification. This is the first time that I wore it. I actually just slept in it. So it's only been washed once and then slept in last night, and now here I am in it. So it will kind of fall into an evenness, if you will, to where it really will be okay on the shoulder health, just the way that the body universally functions. But if you don't do that slit, it won't be even. You can never have healthy shoulders while wearing a seam like this, the way that it comes from the factory. You will never. You will be stretching your pecs because they're uneven. You will be stretching your lats because all the muscles that attach into your rib cage and that move your scapula will all get bound up because they're in a twist, and you're going straight in a twisted position. You're sitting straight in a twisted position. You're sleeping straight in a twisted position. Even on your side, everything you ever do, because you can't get away from the clothing that is placed on you. That's why I am going to design clothing. That's why I focus on the clothing. That's how I say boldly that we should never, unless something happens, we should never stretch. You can exercise, again, not just for the sake of exercising, but you can go have fun. I was doing one-footed front flips the other day, 2 days ago. I made a tutorial. It's within my content. I didn't get sore afterward. I didn't stretch afterward. These are true claims, and I am, they're true. You have to allow your body to work though, or else they don't feel like they could be true, because you are getting sore if you have this seam here. I am, in the past, I was getting sore with this seam here, and I would be if I didn't do the modification to it. So removing the tag, as I mentioned as the prerequisite at the beginning, this one had a tag also, as well as the seam. But that's just going to amplify it more, because if you have a tag causing a gap, then whatever effect that seam is having is now enhanced, because there's already a gap between the spine and the way that the collar will bend. See this side, how it bends nice and flat against my neck, and like where I was saying that upper trap travels. And this side, even with my modification, you can see just how it goes up here, and this side is allowed to, like, I mean, I'm not trying to make it do it in any certain way, but it's just allowed to fold and bend and lay flat against the neck. And over here it just reacts a lot differently because there's just so much thickness with that seam. And your spine, your neck, there's not much room here. And so it's just a small area. And so if there's a difference left to right, if you had a big area, like, you know, that size of a seam wouldn't affect as much a large area. But the width of the rear of your neck, like the edge of the trap is somewhere like here-ish and here. And so really it's only this distance where those muscles are really moving the neck. And if you have that much discrepancy left and right of the way that the material reacts because of the thickness of that seam, it really affects your neck. And your neck comes up and then it pulls into your everything. And I talk about how the jaw stabilizes the entire body, and the jaw, all the muscles that move the jaw go into and through the neck. So now if this is like this, and your jaw is like this, and if your jaw is stabilizing your entire body, it's not only that this trap that is also affecting your entire body is now out of balance, but this pec is going to be different. This outer pec is going to be working more than your upper pec. Because see the position, if my upper pec comes up, this shoulder can come into like a more neutral position because your upper pec should be working. That's also how you have healthy range of motion. But if this is being elevated because it has to try to react to that seam, now this outer pec is trying to just like keep this arm in just in a working natural position, and this is getting so bound up, as well as what I was mentioning within here. This is getting not enough activation, just not a natural amount to where it would normally be. So all that's happening, well, plus more, just from this one seam. Those are just things that I chose to mention there, but yeah, I mean, there's more, because I'll go into more. I mean, your obliques and your abdominal muscles, your core will activate differently in different places. You've got your obliques up here, and then your abs down in here that we normally think of a six-pack, right? If this is twisted up here, now this is going to crunch more than over here, just walking, sitting, sleeping, standing, everything, and you're training a patterning. As I talk about training a patterning in everything, I'm standing on one foot right there, anything you're ever doing, you're breathing. If you're alive, that's like the thing that makes up physical human life, is breath. And when you breathe, I've talked about how it takes most all of your body to stabilize or to do something to breathe. And so if you're breathing, training a patterning in this kind of position, bound up, trying to open, tag here, can't open, all of these things, right? And this is huge. So, yeah, it's a lot. I've mentioned how the seams that go down the arms, they basically have to just be even, because if they're pinned one direction or the other, even if it's the same direction, it's pulling your shoulders. If they're pinned forward, you're going into external rotation without a say. If they're pinned backward, at least it's into internal rotation, but then it's forcing you to be. So side seams I've gone over. Ideally there's 0 side seams, because at least in undershirts, shirts directly against you, because when you wear a button-up shirt, a lot of times that's just how it's stitched, and you know, I wear those, but it's stitched flatter in that case. Because if you have side seams, now your shoulders that want to retract into internal rotation and just lay against your side to just be in a good natural neutral position. He's actually going to be mowing right here, so that noise is going to be here for a minute. They need to be able to not have a gap here and just lay against where your arm meets your rib cage. And if you have side seams there, now there's a gap, and now the muscles that are holding your shoulder into a good position, notice this gap here, good position. If there's a gap, these muscles, one of them being that upper trap we're talking about that's already being affected on the side with this seam, they're now having such an overwork in a position they're not designed to work in. And that travels into a lot. So yeah, naturally healthy shoulders are about the shirt or anything that you place on your upper body. But again, stemming at the shoelaces. If you tie your shoes unevenly, the same direction, you will never have naturally healthy shoulders. I couldn't either. Even from this point forward, knowing what I know is not about knowledge. You are literally tying a knot, pulling your foot, one of them in that case, into external rotation. You will never have healthy shoulders. I could never, or he or she, have healthy shoulders naturally tying your shoes uneven, because it travels up your entire body. And as I mentioned earlier about doing anything in a twist, that you're then doing everything in a twist. And now trying to raise your shoulders like this does not work, and you'll feel it. You have to be even for them to function the way they're designed to function, out of their natural center line. So everything else that I've mentioned within clothing, it's within my content, so you can go find it. All of that plays into the shoulders. Things that are nowhere near your shoulders, that's what I mentioned when I talk about my shoelacing technique, is if you tie your shoes unevenly and if you lace them with anything that is pressing your arches down at all, which is anything besides my lacing technique, then you will be stretching and foam rolling parts of your body that are nowhere near your feet because of your shoelaces in your shoes, right? That goes for these muscles that I'm talking about here, okay? So, naturally healthy shoulders is the clothing. That's the fix. Universal for every human. Every human. Universal. If you have something within your own situation that's unique to you, because of there's actually something, like I mentioned, you know, that's different. But if your body just has pain in the shoulders, if you can't seem to stand normal and neutral, the solution, universal, 100% of the time in those cases, is your clothing. It is. There could be other things possibly playing into it. But if there's not, and you seem to have tried everything, regardless if you tried anything or not, it is the clothing. It is. It is. So, these have to be behind the shoulders. This one's not the example of that. That's why I'm using this shirt as an example, because that seam. They have to be behind the shoulders. Have to, just to have a natural functioning body, universally. Me or any other human has to be behind the shoulders so that you can raise them, and the seam on the edge should not be farther out, or very, very slightly if so, but it should be right at the edge of the shoulder, because then, again, you can lift. If this seam is out here, I can't lift. And then cramping, binding up, you know, all through up in here, out here, up and around, underneath the scapula, and all your scapular motion, which is very natural to just have loose, open, internal bodies, will be inhibited if you have seams affecting and altering the way that your body wants to just naturally work. Okay, so that's enough to talk about within shirts that cause shoulders to just not operate the way that they would and will. Remove all the tags I mentioned, right? This one will affect everything, causing a twist. Shoulders won't work in a twist. This one will cause your traps to be what people would call overactive, which is really just in a state of protective tension, because they're being in an altered position to where now they just stiffen up to protect themselves because they can't work properly in a position they're not designed to work properly in. So cut that tag out. Now you can stand straight. You wonder why you can't stand straight. It's not you, it's your clothing. If there's a tag back there, nobody can stand straight. It's not about strength. It's not about exercise. It's not about posture. It's just about a natural positioning that's not being allowed to happen because there's a tag in the way, right? Internal rotation. Now, if there's a tag right beneath my collar, right in the center of my spine, center of my back, right on the base of my spine, that internal rotation turns into external rotation. Now, all the muscles within the shoulder that keep it healthy in internal rotation aren't allowed to even be activated, just because there's literally something physically in the way. It's that simple. And I say that out of encouragement. I didn't know until I found these things out through personal experience. I just got praying, I got curious, got a pair of scissors out, and I found these things out. It's that simple. You do not need physical therapy. You do not need to stretch. You do not need surgery within your rotator cuff, unless very specific cases for each one of those things. For general people, for the vast majority of any shoulder pain or any lack of mobility, it is the clothing, period. Out of truth, out of universal, try it on your own body within your own clothing truth. It is. So that's why I do what I do. So I'm not worried about the mower, but I understand it might be a little bit noisy. So that's out of my control. That's fine. Yes. Also, if there's a gap in the back because of a tag, now these seams are going to want to fall forward because that gap will then place the clothing in more of this kind of a position. But if you're allowed to get your back, as it is down the rest of the shirt, against that clothing, that'll almost like pull, but really just that's the way that it would lay, pull these shoulder seams back to behind your shoulders where they should be. So, naturally healthy shoulders are so simple. Ideally, your shirt stops very close to where your hips hinge, because if you sit down and the back of your shirt sits on what you're sitting on, that'll cause it to go like this into external rotation. So then when you're sitting, even if your shirt fits you up top and the seams are in the correct places, right at the edges of the shoulders and behind them on top, you have removed all the tags. If it's too long, it will then sit on what you sit on behind you, pushing it like this. So now you're sitting like this. No way your core can be active. Universal human design, it cannot happen. No way you can get your shoulders retracted into internal rotation. No way you can breathe naturally in that position. You will get neck tension in the front, neck tension in the back. Your traps will be trying to do so much work to do things they aren't designed to do. Your teeth will then mesh differently. All of these things. So, yes, keep these off the wrists, well, off of your hand. And I've talked about that many times. I've talked about internal rotation being kind of a closed but open position. Closed within the extremities, feet and arches closed in, hands naturally just closed, meaning in line, like neutral, and then rib cage and hips at that point being allowed to open. So if your collar of your wrist on your sleeve is over your hand, you're trying to hold it open, like hold it up off of your hand, and look at my shoulder, right? Because the hand's naturally neutrally here. If you open it up and try to like retract it by trying to hold your sleeve up, it alters the way your entire upper body works, okay? This right here, not touching the base of your shirt, ideally right at where your hips hinge. And then I mentioned these seams right at the edges of the shoulders and the top ones behind the shoulders. All tags out, no uneven seams left to right, and then everything else within the clothing, which is placed within my free content, and you will have naturally healthy shoulders. You just will. All of these muscles that have gotten bound up and just adhered to your rib cage, you might need to use your own hands like I have done and release them, because scar tissue is something that doesn't really go away on its own, but it goes away being broken up and loosened over years and years of trying to breathe in an uneven patterning. Okay, so there's your naturally healthy shoulders. I am the guinea pig. I am the living example of this. All of this information is universal and true because you can try it on your own body with your own clothing. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to be designing minimal clothing that just allows the clothing that we wear, that you will purchase from me if you do, to just be good to go from the factory for myself and everybody else. The seams will sit where they need to just allow the body to have its natural hinge points, natural movement, and 100% natural materials. So if you stick around for that, that would be awesome. It will come when it comes. Clothing designed by me, Evan Strong. And yes, I also have a lot of content just on the human body and its natural functioning and its natural positions that it would be in until being altered through our clothing. You can go through and find those if you'd like. And yeah, thank you. I understand there's noise from the mower. I understand I'm talking a little bit louder. I'm a little bit closer to the camera, but the information's still here. The content's still the same, even though there's a little bit of unexpected noise. Okay, thank you.